to Resiliency Within. I am Elaine Miller-Karish, your host, and our show is dedicated to answering the question, as many of you know, what else is true? The experiences of my guests today illuminate that with understanding mental health conditions and receiving support and guidance and accepting help, health and life can be transformed. Too often, mental health conditions are not understood. The story of my guest today can be a beacon of hope for all individuals and families trying to help loved ones who have undiagnosed mental health conditions. So my guests today are Shelly Sood and Nikhil Torsekar. They are husband and wife, and they believe in the importance of owning your health and untethering your life. Shelly describes herself as an author, mother of three, wife, and entrepreneur. She has founded GIOSTAR Chicago. Nikhil is a devoted husband, dedicated parent, thriving professional. He works in marketing at GIOSTAR Chicago. He has his BA from Washington University, an MS from DePaul University, and an MBA from the very famous University of Chicago, which I have visited before in the past, Nikhil. They will share their amazing story. They've navigated a harrowing, but ultimately redemptive journey with mental health. Shelly went through a harrowing ordeal to get Nikhil to accept what was hiding in plain sight. And they're going to tell us what that means, that he suffered from undiagnosed bipolar disorder. It nearly destroyed their marriage and their lives until he agreed to get proper diagnosis and seek treatment in 2016. This has also inspired the launch of GIOSTAR Chicago, a leading regenerative medicine center that they'll tell us more about. 6 years later, they run a successful business and have developed a robust content platform called the Shelly Story. They actually have their own podcast that they'll also tell us a little bit about. This encompasses, a book, a forthcoming movie, a blog, where they speak with guests on a broad array of topics, including mental health in the South Asian diaspora, technologies that can assist with managing bipolar disorder, advocacy efforts, and alternative treatment modalities such as Ayurveda and meditation. So welcome, both of you. I'm so grateful to have you on the show today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So I'm just going to ask you as we get started, is there anything on your mind that you would like to talk to that we haven't planned for as we get started before we'll start with our planned questions? So Shelly, I'll start with you. Anything on your mind that you want to mention as we get started?
No, well, thank you for having us, Elaine. We're really excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to hear your story and to illuminate your story so that our listeners can understand the journey and also just the hope in your story as well. And how about Nikhil, anything on your mind right now as we're getting started?
No, just excited to see where this conversation goes.
All right.
Thanks again for having us.
Well, I'm so very honored to have both of you today. So let's get started then. So just for each one of you, how has your lived experience inspired you to create the work that you're both clearly passionate about in the world? And Shelly, do you want to go first?
Sure. So, my experience, I really learned a tremendous amount from my hardships and my struggles and my obstacles. And, that really, I had so many crossroads in my life of which way I wanted to go. I could be either the victim who, why is this happening to me? What happened here? I did all the right things or thought I did, and my life was falling apart with this divorce and whatnot, and my husband not seeking treatment. Instead, I took it as, okay, I'm going to get him help. We came back together, we healed our family together, and then I eventually launched the company because I really felt the desire to help others after I helped save my own husband's life.
Well, my goodness, that's quite powerful. And how about for you, Nikhil? What has it been like for you and your experience that makes you passionate about this work?
Yeah, so I think there's a great quote. I think it's by Viktor Frankl. It's suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. And I'm just bringing that one up because on the surface, I think Shelly and I had a great life. I mean, I think picture perfect marriage. And as you mentioned, I went to pretty good universities, had a good career, but there was a lot of dark clouds on the horizon. And that culminated in a pretty calamitous event that I guess we'll go into a little more. But in the end, it definitely opened my eyes to the importance of storytelling and the importance of sharing your journey and inviting other people to open up. And so in addition to the GIOSTAR company that I help with marketing, I'm very passionate about this podcast that we run, the Shelly Story. And so that's, it's been 6 months in the making, but it's something that every day I'm very grateful for having that lived experience that informed my perspective and has given me an understanding, and it's made it easier to connect with people who are going through similar journeys.
Well, so when you say the Shelly story, that you called it Shelly, it's after your name. Can you both tell us and illuminate a little bit about what that is, the Shelly story?
Yeah.
Well, the Shelley story is really about owning your own health to various degrees. So whether that means holistic healing or going to the right providers or surrounding yourself with the right professionals for any degenerative conditions. It could be mental illnesses, it could be arthritis or anything somebody's suffering from. And so we really like to look at our health as we own it, we can create our own destiny. Yes, we need our doctors, we need our nurses, we need all these other people to support us and to guide us. But if we don't own our own health and the right path that works for us, we're doomed. So, we really want to enlighten everybody to understand that and understand some of the things that are out there, whether it's Ayurvedic treatments or it's, working with a psychologist or, cognitive behavioral solutions or, anything of the sort, even some things that are out of the box.
Yes, sometimes those out of the box things really help. So
Yeah.
when you're talking, what came up in my mind is it sounds like you're into whole body health. So, we've separated the mind somehow from the body when they're really interconnected. Would that be a true statement? So, Nikhil, would you
Or
like to?
100%.
Okay. And so bringing up modalities that can help. When one doesn't, there may be others that do. I had a guest on recently who had been diagnosed with had serious trauma in her life. And she said she had worked with a therapist that more or less said, I don't know if there's anything I really can do that can help you. She was so demoralized, and she left there and she enrolled in a dance class. And she noticed that after a little bit of a couple of weeks of being in the dance class, that she started to feel better. And so she realized that movement was part of her healing, right? And so I think that's just really important for our guests to hear, that sometimes there's many roadways up the mountain to healing, and not all of the roadways work for each one of us. So let me ask you, let me get into some other questions. How did mental illness impact your life and your journey? And if you could talk a little bit about bipolar disorder, and what was it like? How did you know? I mean, I think many people have family members with undiagnosed bipolar and other mental health conditions, and they're just seeing behaviors that are problematic, but they don't know there is an etiology that is about mental health. So which one of you would like to go first? Okay, go ahead, Nikhil.
Yeah, gladly. I live and breathe this stuff all the time.
Okay, go ahead. Yes, please.
And literally live and breathe, because as I may have shared before, it's definitely in my DNA, because on two levels. Number one is my father, he's retired now, but he was a psychiatrist. And my mother is somebody who, if we were to delve deeper, not even deeper, just delve and then just look at the surface, she pretty much fit all the markers for bipolar disorder. If you look at the DSM, where they've got all this, the symptoms, not sleeping much, mood swings, there's obviously also the creativity. Bipolar is not always a completely bad thing. There are a lot of people with bipolar disorder who are incredibly creative and, incredibly brilliant. But yeah, like I said, my father was a psychiatrist, and it's something that people always say to me, "Whoa, that's crazy that having a father who had this background, you would have thought he would have had some insights." But I would argue is actually the opposite, because there was there's a couple things. Number one is the clinical detachment, because when you're talking to people with these disorders all day, you don't want to think that it lives under your roof. You want to have that sort of, you want to basically have some sort of separation of, as they say, church and state, between what's happening at the office and what's happening at home. I'm not using that as an excuse, but I'm saying there's some type of explanation for where his perspective is coming from. So there were a lot of things in my mother's behavior that I think if we had taken a more proactive approach, could have saved a lot of heartache and saved a lot of stress, financial dislocation, et cetera. But that's water under the bridge. As I said, you know, it informed the next phase of our journey, which is trying to bring awareness and helping people to share their stories. The second aspect of it is the cultural stigma, because, you know, our parents are from India, and mental health, you know, I had on my show an amazing gentleman who started an organization called Bipolar India. And, you know, for all the issues we have with mental health in this country, we are light years ahead of India. I mean, India, it is a heartbreaking, it really breaks my heart to see the suffering that happens in India because of misunderstanding of this disease. There's a lot of, you know, India is a beautiful country. I'm very proud of my heritage. There's so much, as we talked about with Ayurveda and, you know, spiritual learnings, but there is this labeling of mental illness as almost like being possessed by demons, you know? So I would say my parents were a little bit more enlightened than that. But at the same time, because of the collectivist nature of our culture, because, you know, the people at the temple or the people at the Indian Cultural Society, because, you know, as immigrants, they were not just friends, they were essentially the family. There was this, on the one hand, there was the support, but on the other hand, there was this, you know, we got to put on our game face. We got to, before social media even existed, there was this showcasing of this idealized version of ourselves. So I bring all that up because this denial, this stigma, it really nearly destroyed my life, because for many years, you know, I had gone from, as I mentioned, you know, I went to a good business school, had a good career, worked at the top consulting firms, but there was a huge instability in my job. I mean, it just was like you know, it was like looking at a penny stock with the
A roller coaster.
fluctuations in terms of how things were. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
The job, the emotions. And so, you know, it was really Shelly who sort of put the mirror up and said, look, here's what's happening in your life. And, you know, even though I had initiated divorce proceedings, even though, you know, I was ready to move on with our marriage, she said, look, I just want you to get help, want you to be a, you know, healthy person, want you to be a good father. And so it was a collaborative effort. You know, she was the one who sort of forced me to face the demons and get treatment. And I'm happy to say that, you know, now our marriage is in better shape than it's ever been. As you mentioned, you know, we've worked together at GIOSTAR, working on a book, working on a movie. This podcast is a joint effort. So yeah, I mean, I would definitely say awareness. I always say that is, if I were to say one word that is really important in anybody's life, I think it's awareness and just owning up to
yeah.
everything.
And I mean, thank you so much for sharing the story, because here, you know, I didn't know your dad was a psychiatrist. Certainly he knows about diagnosis, but I think we even have that old adage that the cobbler's children have no shoes. You know, I think we've known that about that separation, right? In terms of what that might be like. And I also have seen, because myself being an old trauma therapist, is that many times those of us that are in the mental health field, it's hard for us to want to even look at our own families, that there could be challenges. And I'm just saying that for all the mental health professionals that are out there going, you might want to take a closer look at what's happening at home. But can I ask you another question? And then I want to come over to Shelly.
Sure.
So when Shelly did say, you know, let's put a mirror up, let's try to get you some help, were your parents still here with being part of the solution? Your parents come to understand the possible bipolar condition of your mom or not? Were they part of
100%.
that?
No, not at all. I mean, it's really, and I want to say that I don't hold any animosity or I don't hold any hostility towards my parents. I honestly, I mean, I've come to accept limitations in people, and it's not out of any malice. It's just that they're limited people. And I think they were willing to help in a sort of a half-hearted way. I wouldn't say it was really dead. It would oscillate between, you know, my mom saying she was a pediatrician, so she was going to retire and she was going to come out and help, to sort of ghosting Shelly, where she wouldn't pick up her phone. So, and the thing is, it was initially, what's really frightening is if you know anything about bipolar disorder.
I think he's just frozen, but I'll just, add something as his he gets back online.
If it's the
Okay, go ahead.
once they've hit rock bottom, because they only come to see when they hit rock bottom, because when they're on a manic high, they're on top of the world. You
don't want help. It's like, this feels really good, right? Yes,
yeah,
that's
they're
been my
speaking at
experience
conferences.
too.
You're magnetic. I mean, why would you want that to end? And so whenever I would, I wasn't seeing a therapist, but whenever I talked to my dad, he would say, "Hey, here's some Wellbutrin. It's a little pick me up." It's like, whoa, it's like taking, I would say, like taking a pile of logs and throwing a match on it.
Well, and there's different,
but
and
really, I think what.
Go ahead. I think that there's also, I think it's important for our listeners to know that there's different medications that can help with bipolar. And sometimes the antidepressants are not the right medications. And then that's why it's really important to find a medical provider that really understands the different medications that can be the most helpful. But I want to just say one other thing that I think is important to illuminate is I think that, I'm also first generation. My mother came from El Salvador. And my mother was very similar to what you're talking about, is that you keep the problems within the family. Because when you're an immigrant, it's very important that you're creating a new life. And that new life means that people see you. There's enough obstacles to face if you have an accent, if the color of your skin is different, if you come from a different land. And so considering the immigrants that are coming to the United States at this time, that it's really important for people to hear this, that there is help available. There are people that have, understand culture and can help you with help and assist if you're in that kind of situation. And I think that because there's been a movement in the United States right now for equity, diversity, and inclusion, that we're seeing more doors opening and more understanding. So I just want to, kind of put that out there, because I think what you're saying about the culture of India, I could say was very similar to the culture of El Salvador, probably why I became a therapist, obviously, right? Because of the mental health challenges that were going on in my family that were unspoken and undiagnosed. So there you go. Here we are, we both have podcasts, right? Trying to illuminate this so people don't suffer like we've seen the suffering in our own families, in our own community. Yep. So thank you for really bringing that forward. But I want to kind of go over to Shelly and see what Shelly might want to say about bipolar and being the partner, because I think, so many people have talked to me about, I don't know what to do. They won't listen. And I think what you just described is that when you're in that manic phase, it feels so good. And, of course, the depression doesn't feel good. But when you're in that manic phase, it's hard to say, listen, let's look at this. So Shelly, over to you.
Yeah, so for approximately 15 years of our marriage, I was in such denial, I guess I would say, but I didn't even realize it was denial because it was just so embedded within me. It was embedded in the culture. It was embedded in the idea that, we have to keep up with the Joneses. We have to appear a certain way. We have to be successful in our careers, the nice house, the nice cars, just the picture perfect life all wrapped up into a big bow. And that's just not reality. And so I missed a lot of the signs of the highs and lows because, one, I was not educated on the disease. I had no exposure to mental illness whatsoever all these years. However, I come from a highly educated family. I'm a daughter of two physicians. Nikhil's parents are both physicians as well. So, you can see if we are so limited in our ideas and beliefs,
Yes.
but had high levels of education, I can only imagine other people. So it was a huge challenge just to even see it. He was traveling for so many years. He was consulting, so he was gone 4 to 5 days a week. So I had no idea he was experiencing these kinds of highs, and his behavior was changing at work. And then he'd come home, he'd have depressive episodes. So we think, okay, it's depression or somewhat. So, he'd try some medication. And of course, when you pair when you're giving an antidepressant, usually without a mood stabilizer, which I learned very quickly,
Yes.
And you have a bipolar patient who was diagnosed or not, doesn't matter. It leads to, a manic episode, and the cycle and the nightmare can continue. And this is a very common thing for a lot of people. And so that's another reason we want to really come out and start talking about this and help people be aware of what the symptoms are, because the last thing we want is somebody to have go through 15, 20 years of their life like we did, unaware, when we could have had a much more better quality of life, a better marriage, a better family life all these years, had we discovered it, or had his parents understood, well, maybe they did or didn't, but that there was a genetic predisposition to this disease.
Yes. So let's pause for that, because I think that's very important. And you mentioned it too, Nikhil, that bipolar does tend to run in families. Not all diagnosis of bipolar, maybe because there's been a family member, but can you say a little bit more about that, Shelly? Because maybe people go, oh, that's why, mom did that. Like what you just said, Nikhil, that you didn't necessarily know. So Shelly, can you give us your perspective about this?
Yeah, so there is a lot of times of genetic predisposition to the disease. And when it runs in the family, that is one of the points where a psychiatrist used to be able to diagnose a patient who has bipolar disorder. So when this actually came down and I realized what was going on, the psychiatrist said to me, is there bipolar disorder in the family? And that's kind of when we recognized that, or I recognized that Nikhil's mother was likely, suffering from the illness herself. So, when that denial and that kind of roadblock you're faced with, and your other family members are unwilling to kind of see that, or, help the family or help themselves, it poses a lot of problems from a clinician standpoint, even a psychiatrist, to really effectively diagnose it. And so the one thing that I really learned is that it is so important for psychiatrists, for therapists, to have other family members, those supportive family members, I'm not saying everybody, but select family members or friends involved in their treatment plans, involved in providing a clinical history, because that was a missing component. You only get 50% of what's going on from the patient themselves.
So when you think about, if you were to look back and, like we say, hindsight is 20/20 vision, are there things that now that you wish you would have maybe acted on earlier that would have
100%.
made a difference? Could you maybe say a few things about that? We're going to take a break in a few minutes, so we can talk about it a little bit, and we'll continue after the break.
Yeah, I mean, there were so many things that would have made a difference. It was the realization of something more severe was going on. It was I turned to his father blindly and, saw him as the expert. And so that was a huge challenge. And I should have thought for myself. I should have owned our own health. I should have taken that responsibility. I should have looked for the signs, but I was just too busy. And women these days, when they're raising children and they're trying to have a career, it's a lot to handle. So it was a perfect storm. And so in hindsight, I wish I would have stepped back and understood what was going on sooner.
Well, and so that kind of also, I think this is where you're kind of in a little bit of a dilemma, because here you have a psychiatrist in the family that's the expert, and that your husband is having challenges. So of course, I would go to that person too.
Right.
And then if you're not getting the whole perspective, because he can't look at his son with the full lens, then you become handicapped in being able to help. So what a dilemma to be in terms of not being able to segue in that. Nikhil, as you're hearing us talk about that, do you have any comment you want to make about what Shelly's saying?
Yeah, my heart really goes out to people who suffer from bipolar disorder, but also just the people who have to live with them, because it's challenging. And as I'm getting more engaged in the community of mental health, social media, I've met a lot of people through there's this thing called Twitter Spaces, and I'm seeing a lot of what challenges Shelly went through. Because as I said before, think about trying to get it through to somebody that they're literally, it's almost like they're looking through the looking glass. They have this fantastical view of what reality is, and you're seeing that they're losing their jobs, they're on the verge of divorce, and they just can't see it. So
Yeah.
My heart really goes out to people who are trying to get people to get treatment. And I'm hoping that through stories like this, through sharing our story, we can help provide some support.
Well, and I'm just struck by your deep insight and compassion, because when I've seen people that have been in manic phases, that they don't want to hear what other people are saying, and that you had to have an experience that shifted from being in that space to being a person who could really look at the reality of what was happening, not only, excuse me, in your own life, but also how Shelly and the family was being impacted. So what I'm hoping that we will do is, after we take our break, that we can continue this conversation and the other components that you both believe are so important, that our listeners understand if they're faced with the same situation. And Nikhil, I have to say that I'm now a fan of both of you right now because I'm seeing this amazing relationship, and how, because sometimes it doesn't have this course of recovery and redemption and a transformation.
I think it's 90% of the marriages end in divorce.
So what if more people understood what you understand now, and that there could be a different trajectory for people's lives, so that we could reduce the suffering? And that's what I'm hearing you both really trying to do and dedicating your life to. All right, we will, listeners, we'll be back in just a couple minutes, and we will continue our discussion with Shelly and Nikhil. Welcome back. This is Elaine Miller-Karras with Resiliency Within, and I'm with my guest today, Shelly Sood and Nikhil Torsekar, and they are speaking to us about a very important journey that they have been on regarding grappling with bipolar disorder. So we were talking before the break a little bit about, what life was like, and I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit more, if I can ask you the question, because I know that there were some dark moments that Nikhil, you went through an 18-month manic episode, and that resulted in being suicidal and undergoing full-blown depression and then to recovery. So can you tell us a little bit about that journey, and maybe both you and Shelly can say what happened that got you on that road of recovery? Because 18 months of a manic episode, whoa, that is a lot. And just the exhaustion and what was happening to you and to Shelly. We haven't talked about your children and how that impacted the entire family. So who would like to go first? Go ahead and start.
Go ahead, Nikhil.
Yeah. So like you said, the most recent, knock on wood, the most recent manic episode was in 2015, and it's tough to really talk about, because right now it's just it's one of those things where it's like flashes. But what I can say is I felt that there was a combination of it being, obviously there's the genetic component, but there's also the situational, because I was in a career that was having me on the road for 4 days a week, and I was having to get on a plane every Monday morning at, get out of bed at 4 o'clock. Working, 15, 16 hours, very work hard, play hard culture. And then what happened was I was sort of programmed into that mode of go, go, go. And then I was, starting a job where I was working locally. So I still was on that track, but it was almost like the speed of the record had gone from, 33 to 45. I'm dating myself here.
There's a little pause in the and he's frozen again. So Shelly, do you want to go ahead and continue until he comes back?
My RPM.
Oh, here he's back again. Okay, go ahead.
Energy. Sorry. Where did we cut off? I was just like, there was a lot, what I was considering like creativity and energy. I felt like nobody really understood me. And so any marriage, obviously after 15 years or after 20 years, there's going to be lulls, but I would sit there and take those as, oh, this marriage it's not doing it for me. So, on a whim, I decided to say, I'm done with this marriage, and, filed for divorce. And I didn't realize, how much that, all the collateral damage, not just my wife, but my kids. They were robbed of their stability. So it was very challenging for them. And as I said before, I really was living life through the looking glass, because I had this perception that I was making a lot of friends, speaking at conferences. I basically thought I was, walking on water. I could eat whatever I wanted. I could drink like a fish, nothing. It just felt like bulletproof. And then eventually what happened was, it was like, there's that Ernest Hemingway quote, "How did you go broke?" It was gradually and then suddenly. So it was like it was this slow burn, you know, it was like everything was just, and I can't even imagine the horror that Shelly was going through watching this with clear eyes. You know, as my job, as I was losing my job, as, you know, it's racking up thousands of dollars in credit card debt, as, you know, my health was deteriorating. But it's kind of crazy, but what really ended up sort of tipping the scales was a conversation where I found out from Shelly that my parents had pretty much washed their hands of me. And I think I mentioned this to you before, was that my father had said, you know, because Shelly said he's definitely got some mental illness. We need to get it checked out. And my dad's line was, no, he's got you fooled. He's an Academy Award winning actor. He's a sociopath, you know. And just to hear those words from somebody who is a mental health professional, but also your own flesh and blood, that's when I always say it was like the Tower of Jenga just crumbled. And so those were some dark days, and that was what sort of led to that suicidal ideation. I wouldn't say that was like a constant thing, but hearing those words and seeing, you know, you're unemployed, you have no place to stay, you have nobody. That's really when I started thinking about, you know, taking my own life. But, you know, fortunately, been on the road to recovery since 2016, and it's not a, you know, click your fingers and everything is hunky dory. I mean, there are still some dark moments, but it is something that I'm very grateful that I did have a second chance. And you know, as I said in my document there, I disagree with F. Scott Fitzgerald's line that there are no second acts in American life, because we're definitely living proof of that.
I couldn't agree more with you about that. And, you know, as you're talking, I'm thinking about Shelly. And Shelly, I can't imagine what this journey was like for you. And honestly, many people would have just said, I'm done. I'm walking away. I'm going to get as far away. I'm going to protect our kids. So what was it that said, I'm going to stay with this man? I'm going to try to get him help. I mean, I have a lot of respect for you in terms of you deciding to kind of say, let's get some help. So can you illuminate a little bit about your journey when he was
Yeah.
going through that? And that's not have been an easy time.
No, no, not at all. I mean, it was 18 months of pure clarity as to what was going on. Because the moment he filed for divorce was the moment I had my epiphany and understood that this was bipolar disorder. And by then it was just too late. It was too late because no clinician, no psychiatrist, no therapist, no lawyer, you know, believed me. So even Nikhil refused. So I had all the odds against me to be able to rebuild my family. And there were moments, there were serious moments of despair where I thought to myself, you know what, I'm just going to take the kids, I'm going to run, grab the passports and run. And you get so desperate because the legal system, it waits for things to happen. And of course, Nikhil would have never hurt the children intentionally, but out of neglect or out of, manic behavior or having a psychotic episode, these things can happen. We had a 13, 14-month-old baby, and a little 11-year-old girl who's now 18 and a 8-year-old boy. And so my hands were tied. And so I would go through these cycles. So I would be riding the wave that he was riding in such a way, but a little bit different, So every time he would give me an ounce of hope, there would be, that he would go and get treatment. And then 2 minutes later, he'd refuse. And so people would tell me, just give up. There's no hope, give up. But I had such conviction and belief in who he was and his soul, and we were still highly connected despite all of the dysfunction that we both had, because I was guilty of it too. I had my meltdowns, I had outbursts, and just as much as he did at times. And so, despite all that, I knew who he was, and I knew in my heart that the person I married was going to come back regardless of whether the marriage was going to survive or not. I knew that person would come back for my children, for society, and to do something real and substantial in this world. And now he is.
Oh my gosh. It kind of brings almost tears to my eyes to think that, with all the individuals that didn't believe, that you believed and you could still see that core goodness in him and you weren't going to let that go. That must have been very powerful for you when you finally realized that, Nikhil, that she had that for you. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just beyond grateful. And, it's amazing because these conversations really help me, because sometimes I do forget. Sometimes I am like, you know, I feel like my life has taken a detour. It's not what I had imagined when I was in business school, getting out and, having a C in my title and, being a captain of industry. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I mean, my career is a little bit different from what I expected, but I really feel that it's one part of the equation. And I just feel like there's happiness there, but it might not be what the template for the Indian American success story is. But I'm very happy with what I'm doing. I mean, I'm happy to support Shelly with GIOSTAR. I'm happy that every night. I mean, obviously not this week because I'm out of town, but most nights we're able to sit down as a family, have dinner together, and also, yeah, just tell our story in a public fashion, and again, just giving hope to people. So yeah, and I mean, I'll be honest, sometimes I say to myself, why am I so lucky? Do I deserve this? Because it's like I do reflect on a lot of the things that I said and did. And I'm just like you said, most wives would have definitely just wiped their hands of me, but Shelly did believe in me. So I do feel very fortunate. And it's my hope, because like I said, I do engage with a lot of people who are suffering from bipolar disorder, and I don't have a solution for them, because a lot of the solutions, I mean, yes, I did the work on my own, but I had somebody who was willing to, pull me out of the abyss, and had hope that I
and
could
and not and
reach
sometimes
greater
people
heights.
lose that person because of the
Yeah.
behaviors that happen. But I there's something that I want to reflect upon. I guess this is my meaning. It doesn't have to be yours, but when you said maybe this is not the image of a person who's a family from originating from India, the success story. But I guess I
Right.
have to kind of say I see it as a success story, because you're also creating a paradigm shift. There are so many people of Indian descent that are suffering
Mhm.
right now and thinking that there's something wrong with them. And who knows, they're listening,
Mhm.
or that they'll say, oh, well, look at him, look at them. Yes, they went through this, but then they also found a way, a path of less suffering, of yes, life has its ups and
Right.
downs. You're going to have ups and downs. You got kids, you got ups and downs, right? But I mean, to have this now, this foundation that you both have realized can also be another very powerful role model for the Indian
Yeah.
community that might change many people's lives. So I just wanted to add that, because having worked, I've been to India myself. I was there in
Yeah. No, and
2019.
that's
I just
another.
think, wow, this is a really miraculous story. So I don't know,
Yeah.
Nicole, I have to say that.
And that's the other thing. I am fortunate because Shelly is willing, because she went through what she went through with our marriage and her career too. She's willing to say, I'm not worried about that. We'll be talking about certain things that we're worried about, but in terms of career, in terms of where the book's going, the podcast, the center, it's just really, I feel very fortunate to have that faith and that vision, because
Well,
not
so
everybody has that.
so I want to make sure that we have time to talk about the things that here you have GIOSTAR. Maybe say something about
Mhm.
that. That sounds so exciting. But also, you both wanted to bring out that there, the array of different treatments that are not necessarily always traditional, that also may be helpful for people that have been diagnosed with an array of mental health conditions and other conditions as well. So over to you, whoever wants to go first, because I want to make sure we have time for that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there are so many different modalities and ways to address, the mental illness component as well as other degenerative conditions. And so at GeoStar, I'll talk a little bit about that. We help patients who are suffering from so many different degenerative conditions using their own stem cells. And, I was blessed to actually cross paths with the CEO after Nikhil and I got back together and started rebuilding our family, and the chief scientific officer, who have been in the field of stem cell science, gene therapy, cancer research for 25, 30 years. And so, it was wonderful to be able to partner with them and use them as kind of a building block, as well as trying to understand the science behind it, learn from them. And so I was always a firm believer of surrounding myself with mentors and people I can learn from. And they turned out to be such wonderful people, humanitarians, and, very close family members, pretty much. So that was an incredible experience on the one hand. Not to go too much on a detour here, but in terms of our own healing journey, Nikhil and I have really embraced meditation and mindfulness, and really have found that commonality between us that has kind of bridged our marriage and what we enjoy talking about. I always remembered years ago, I had such a tolerance for the negative talk. And a lot of times when somebody is manic or depressed, they have a lot of negative talk. They put down other people a lot. And at this point in time, our marriage is solidified that we don't waste time on worrying about other people. And so I always say to myself, and I even learned this through my mindfulness and meditation, never give your power up. Because once you start letting people control your emotions and your feelings and how you react to the world, you've given that power up. And so I always have lived in this kind of bubble, of my own bubble of peace and prosperity. And that has given me a tremendous amount of grounding and peace, because the world is it, there's so much going on in this world today, and it
Yes.
just depends on where you're headed and where you're going to embrace, what components you're going to embrace. And so that mindfulness and daily meditation has been a game changer for me as well, in terms of managing my life and managing the demands of this world, as well as slowly untethering my life to my true purpose, which is GIOSTAR, and eventually my book coming out, and the movie, and all these other things that are hopefully going to help the world.
I think they're going to help the world. I think they probably already are. But I'm just struck by, in terms of your mindfulness and meditation practice, Shelly, and please correct me if this is not right. But, when you said that you kind of knew, but then everybody was telling you something different, it sounds like that your mindfulness practice really helped you to really focus on trusting that gut instinct of yours, and not being swayed by someone saying, oh, but you need to do this. Well, wait a second, is this right? Is this centering with what my beliefs are? Would that be true? I don't know if you can say something.
100%. And it gives you that time to reflect, and you start trusting yourself. You start trusting your intuition. You start trusting your gut reactions, and when you make decisions in your life. And I wasn't doing that all this time. I was relying on, let's say, Nikhil's father for advice. I was relying on my parents for advice. I was not looking within myself. And so it really changed me, not only just the experience, but the post aftermath of this disaster. And I look back on it, and it was the most horrific part of my life, but I'm thankful for it.
And how do you think it's affected your children, this shift? If
I
you could
was
see her,
concerned.
listener, she just had a smile on her face. So go ahead, Shelly.
Concerned initially, that we had created such turmoil and such damage within our children's lives. But I am seeing that they're living their life according to their own rules. And I say that in such a sense that they're living their true purpose in this world. Like my daughter, who's 18 now, is going to art school and living her dream. And that, with Asian culture, is a very
Yes.
unconventional career.
Yes.
So, that I find is to be a beautiful thing. And so they have shown a tremendous amount of resilience and understanding that there is hope and there is a future. And when you go through these kinds of things, family and collectiveness really means a lot.
Yeah. And so, Nikhil, what would you like to say about the different kinds of modalities and the different things that you also feel people need to know who may be realizing that they could have bipolar disorder?
Yeah, I mean, I always think about recovery and healing as a pie, right? I mean, there's not one exclusive modality you should rely on. So I would always say it's a mix between. There's definitely you have your baseline, which is medication, and then you have your baseline, which is cognitive therapy. And you need to add to that, like Shelly said, meditation is really important. And it's tough because there's so much noise out there, right? I mean, everyone is calling themselves a health and wellness expert, right? And so it gets a little bit cliched, but I would say definitely, tune out that skepticism, try it out, because I talk to a lot of friends and I always ask them, have you tried meditation? And they always say, oh, that's just too complicated for me, or that's too, but I don't mean to diminish that, but I always say, you know how to count, right? You know how to breathe. Put those two together and there you go. And it's just like, there's so much evidence out there that shows that it can be beneficial. There was a study by the Chopra Foundation about how it improves the expression of telomerase, not to get too scientific here, but the point is there is evidence that this stuff works. And so, as Shelly said, that will help you to trust your intuition and not get swayed by what you see on Twitter or what you see on Instagram. But the final linchpin of that really is relationships. And we talked to the head of NAMI Chicago on our podcast about how relationships are really that missing link, because you can be doing all of this stuff. You could have the best therapist, you could have the best medication. You do mindfulness meditation until the cows come home. But if you're in a toxic relationship, whether it's your spouse or your friends, then that stuff is all for naught. So I'd say really putting all those pieces together, it's not going to be foolproof and it's not going to be a slam dunk every time, but I think it definitely puts you on the road to success.
Well, I also want to just mention, you mentioned NAMI, the National Alliance of Mentally Ill, and that's a wonderful program. It's throughout the country. There are support networks for families and for people that have been diagnosed with an array of different conditions, but they also have, I think, a tremendous amount of support that if you're not getting it from your family, you certainly can get it from other NAMIs, and sometimes NAMI members. And I think that I've learned that sometimes people in our family are not necessarily our biological family, that we can create also an additional family that are our family members of choice, that many times, because of the stigma that we talked about earlier, depending on families and culture, that those relationships can be built in places like NAMI. So thank you for bringing NAMI into the equation.
Yeah.
So I want to make
people
sure
who don't have a Shelly, there's always NAMI. People who
if you don't have a
there's always
Shelly,
NAMI.
I love that. If they don't have a Shelly, so
Tagline.
I'm just wondering if you can tell us. We have a few minutes left only, but can you tell us about your book? When is it going to be published? And also, there are people that may be listening that want to get a hold of you too. How would they get a hold of you? So I'm going to over to you, Shelly. Tell us a little bit about that, and then how people can get a hold of the two of you.
Sure. So Untethered should hopefully be published next year, and they can reach us at shellysood.com, SHELLYSOOD.com, or GIOSTARChicago.com, GIOSTAR Chicago.com, or via email as well.
All right, because I think that you may have people. Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say we also have the podcast, which is at theshellystory.com. So that's the Shelly, that's SHELLY story.com. So it's all one word. We're on all the platforms, Apple, Spotify, and
oh, great. So that people can listen to your podcast, and you have your shows archived so they can hear other parts. Because I think that, I imagine many people would want to know this about your show and about what you're doing in the world, and to see that you're just getting started. I can't imagine what, if I talk to you from 5 years from now, what's going to be happening. So let me ask you that question is, just if you can say maybe each of you a sentence. What do you hope for your future now as you're looking forward and all the different things that you're doing? What are you hoping for? So Shelly, I'm going to start with you.
Okay. I am hoping to make my mark in the world, to create change, to help people untether their own lives, whether it is, destructive family relationships, managing career, trying to be an entrepreneur and have it all according to their equation. And, the ability to really shut out all the noise. And I just really want to emphasize that it's a game changer in that regard.
Certainly sounds like it's changed your life. And how about for you, Nikhil? What would you like to say? Your parting words, parting thought.
Yeah, I I would say that, you know, as you said, and I appreciate the affirmation there. I mean, I would say that the podcast, the book, and the blog are just really a starting point. And what I'd like to do is really amplify that and broaden it as a platform for people who either are looking for a resource or want to tell their story. So I will say that there's no greater joy than I don't consider it, I don't measure it in terms of likes or in terms of retweets or whatever. I think all that, those social media metrics are garbage. But I would say if somebody hears the podcast and they say, wow, you know, I have a family member who's going through this and, you know, I'd love to come on and talk about it. I mean, and I'm sure you can relate. I mean, just the power of storytelling, just to extend that platform and make it something like there's a great platform I'll call it called Mind Valley that we're very big fans of. Just to create something like that that reaches people on a global scale. It's not going to happen overnight, and I'm going to have setbacks, but it's definitely something that that I aspire to.
Thank you, Nikhil, and thank you, Shelly. It's been such an honor to have both of you and to hear your experiences and just how you really have found, like Viktor Frankl said, right, Holocaust survivor, meaning and purpose, and so much has come from your suffering. One of the phrases I use in the show is, "What else is true?" And I think that you're living examples of, yes, you've come from suffering and you've been able to say what else is true about what's possible in your lives. And I want to just say to our listeners, if you're suffering, if you're wondering, I don't know if I can get through whatever is happening in my life right now, I think that we can maybe deep listen to Shelly and Nikhil's story and asking yourself that question, what else can be true in your story, and reaching out. And remember the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill. It's in every community, but now you also have a way to get a hold of Shelly and Nikhil if you'd like to have a further conversation with them. So until next time, be well,